Hello, listener, and thank you for tuning in to the We Should Talk More podcast and the second part of the VOGM series. In this episode, my guest opens up about her son's vein of Galen malformation diagnosis, their difficult journey through treatment and eventual cure, and utilizing her experience to start a nonprofit organization that now helps families around the world. Thank you so much for joining me. If you could introduce yourself and just tell me a little bit about who you are.
I'm Marlene Brochu. I'm the CEO and co-founder of the VOGM Support Network. My son Archer is now 5.5. He was diagnosed at at my 40-week plus 1 day ultrasound, and so we were sent to the neonatologist because they saw the spot in his brain and his enlarged heart, and then they told us what it was, and we kept asking, what does this mean? And they told us it was a grim prognosis with 99% chance that he would die, and if he survived, he'd be severely mentally handicapped. And then we went straight into a emergency C-section, so we were just thrown right into it. It was definitely a lot.
That's definitely a very quick summary of, I'm sure, a very extensive and lengthy story.
Yeah.
When did you find out?
Well, I was just at my routine appointment because I didn't want to be induced, and they wanted to just check his size because he was running big,
Okay.
and make sure the fluid levels were all still good. And that's when they saw it. And
Do you have any pre-existing conditions, anything that would have had you concerned while you were pregnant?
I mean, not for VOGM, there aren't really any that they know of
Okay.
reasons that it would cause this, but I did have what is it called? Gestational diabetes. So they were checking his size since, he was running a little big. So I did have ultrasound at 34 weeks and 36 weeks. And they didn't catch the vein of Galen at the time. I'm not sure if it's because they didn't put the Doppler on with that blue and red lights so that you can kind of see where the blood's flowing. But also, it could just not have been there yet because it just waits to dilate at the end of the pregnancy. The baby starts pumping its own blood to get ready to be born. And before that, just mom's kind of pumping it for the baby. And so that a lot of times then it will get enlarged then. And then you can actually see like the aneurysm because it kind of bubbles up.
Okay. Can you talk to me about the day when you went for your ultrasound and you learned of this condition happening to your baby?
I was just had an appointment in the morning, and I was about to head to work right after, and just a regular checkup. And that's when they found it, and I had to call work, say, hey, I'm not going to make it in, and had to go straight to the hospital, and had to call my husband, say, meet me there with my, delivery bag. And that's when we then met the neonatologist who had actually said, that it's a rare condition. And the funny thing is, or not funny, the frustrating thing is that Lena, my co-founder, had been diagnosed by the same doctor 7 to 8 months prior. And she didn't bother to look into how her daughter is doing, where she's being treated, none of that. She just said that there was one doctor that she knows who has treated it, and the baby didn't survive. So it was, it was hard to hear, and it's very grim prognosis with a 99% chance that he was going to die, and that's so not true. Now he's very happy, healthy, zero neurological deficits. He's bright. He has top of his class for reading.
What's your son's name?
Archer.
Cool. So one of the things that Lena mentioned to me during our conversation is that when the ultrasound tech first saw this and then the doctor came in, neither of them had any idea what this was. They were kind of like, we know that it's an aneurysm, but there's really not much else that we could tell you. How did that go with you? Did they saw a malformation? They knew what it was? How did you go about figuring out exactly what it was and how to move forward?
Well, I don't think the doctor mentioned what it was. They just said they saw something and that they weren't sure. It might be okay, that the neonatologist will have better machines and you'll be able to have better imaging and be able to figure it out better and see what it is. But the funny thing is, I remember being in there with the ultrasound with the neonatologist and noticing that the quality of the picture was a lot more fuzzy. I'm like, that's not the case. They
Mm.
just wanted to get me there because they didn't know what it was. And yeah, they're the ones who told me that it was the vein of Galen malformation. And I remember I had switched providers because I originally um, was in the same practice, but I wanted to. There was one who's kind of more C-section pushy and, planned things, and I wanted to go natural, so I switched to another provider in the practice. But it was kind of ironic. The one who's the C-section pusher, who's like the top C-section guy, who if you want to have a C-section, you go to him. He was
Mm.
there and was a doctor on call and did my C-section. But I just remember him touching like my calf because he was at the end of the bed. And he was like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And I'm like, people stop telling me you're so sorry. Like, what does this mean? And it was really terrifying to hear those, the odds that they said, which is just completely incorrect. Like, even if you don't see a top specialist, it's about a third, a third, a third die, a third are severely mentally handicapped, and a third like live completely normal lives. Whereas if you do see some specialists, like the one we go to Dr. Berenstein, and his new partner or his now partner, Dr. Fifi, their odds are about 80% like success. Like in neonates, it's usually more likely to have complications when it's like in the first few weeks of life. But their prognosis is much better. It's only like 20% chance of to die. So
Okay.
better, 13% better. So that's good.
How did you learn that it's actually much greater? Is this the research that you did on your own?
Um,
That the chance of survival is much greater than you had originally been told.
Oh, well, yeah, it's just the research that they have in for the NHS in
Mm.
England. They have like a national database and they collect all the data, and so it's like from every single one that's ever had it there in the UK. And so they had like the best pool of children, and that was the odds that they have. So.
But I guess what I'm asking is, it wasn't a doctor that relayed this information to you. You had to like Google to find these
Oh, well, I
statistics,
didn't
right?
know about that, I guess, until I'm not sure. I'm not sure if it was the doctor, not like our doctors there in Atlanta, because we were originally in Atlanta when we were diagnosed. And my husband did a lot of research to find our specialists because, they told us this grim statistic. They didn't even talk about treating it, nothing. And
Mm-hmm.
so he has some friends that are physicians, and he got access to their database, their like medical library, and just did research, just dove in, and he found Dr. Berenstein's a lot of his papers, then just reached out and got us up there. And then with at day 12, they couldn't get his heart failure under control. So then we were hella flighted up there, med flighted to Dr. Berenstein in New York City, and the first
Day 12.
embolization.
Oh, wow. So Archer was never released from the hospital. He
Mm-mm,
was born. They kept him in the NICU,
mm-hmm.
and then they flew you guys out to New York.
And he also found Dr. Orbach, who's in Boston. But I think he just reached out to Michelle at Dr. Berenstein's office first, and they got back to him. So we just went that route. And we also did find the VOGM support group. It's a private group on Facebook for parents that a couple moms started like 15 years ago or more, probably about 15 years ago. So actually, that's how I got connected with Lena. Someone was like, "Oh, Lena's down in Atlanta," and then Lena and I met and our husbands and Mary Catherine, her daughter, while Archer was in the NICU. We met at a cafe and got to meet them and talk to them, and it was really reassuring seeing a happy, healthy baby, girl. She's almost 8 months old, or so. So it was really helpful to have, because you feel so alone in this. Like you were talking about these families that are diagnosed with a child that's has either rare condition or is sick, then you do feel very alone and you don't know what to do. So it's really great to meet someone else and get connected and not feel so alone. That's another reason we started the nonprofit, not just to help them get to a provider that can treat their child, but to have a community. And that's what the Facebook group is for. Whenever we get connected with someone new, we add them on there. So
How did you find the group?
actually, my friend Nancy, I guess, just did a search and found it and sent it to
Okay.
me. I think it was around Valentine's Day. He was born February 8th, so it was like within a week of diagnosis. I of birth, I guess. I found the group, so that was really helpful.
Okay, that's awesome. I can only imagine when you're being told those kinds of odds and to find some people who are like, no, they're wrong. That's not true. I'm sure just that
Hmm.
sense of possibility of hope is like a world of change for you. From the minute you find this out and then all this happens, you go to C-section, fly out to New York. Those first 2 weeks where it's like the world just flipped upside down on you.
Hmm.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how did you process all of this with your partner, with your family? How did you manage to keep moving forward and figuring out what to do next?
I guess you kind of go in survival mode, I guess fight or flight. And we chose to fight more. So my husband was like, just go, go, go. And he was, I guess, kind of trying to protect me from a lot of it because, you are just birthed a baby or got
Mm-hmm.
postpartum, going through all that and recovering from surgery. And, I was kind of keeping sane by pumping every 2 hours. I was like, a milking machine. I was like on a regimen because I felt like that's the only thing I had control of is to
Yeah.
nourish my baby to get bigger and healthier for surgeries. Um, and so it was definitely hard. I definitely probably could have processed things better, but you're just in the middle of it. You don't really think about much. And I was recovering from a C-section, but I was just driving myself to the hospital. I wasn't taking any medication. I'm like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Don't worry about me. Just need to worry about the baby. And that's another thing. Like after you're discharged as the mom, you can't stay in the NICU. And so you have to leave your baby. So I'd go every morning and then just stay all day. And then sometimes, then my husband would come. It was a lot.
What are they saying to you at the hospital?
Well, they were just hoping to get his heart failure under control because the VOGM, not just that's not the only issue, is the fact that it pumps too much blood to the heart and back, and so it's kind of like the malformation is where imagine a garden hose, like the artery, is
Mm-hmm.
directly connected to a vein, which is the vein of Galen, and there aren't any capillaries between it. So usually you have like this thing where it goes like this and connects the two, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just direct. And then imagine that fire hose connected to your garden hose, and that's going to cause the garden hose to bubble, and then that bubble is the aneurysm, is the malformation, the vein of Galen malformation. Um, and so that's way too much blood pumping from your brain to your heart and back. And then it enlarges the heart. His heart wasn't getting smaller, it was still pumping too rapidly. And so they're breathing quickly and can't take by mouth. So he did an NG tube for his milk.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so they were just hoping his numbers would improve. And they tried Lasix, which is a medication to try to help heart failure, and that didn't work. So they started the process of getting him metaflighted. And it was crazy. It was like a holiday the day before or the day of that they were trying to get um, a approval. You have to get like approval from the insurance that you can fly. But
Mm-hmm.
the I remember the guy from the MetaFlight company was like, let's not worry about it. Let's just get him there. We'll figure out payment later. So I was very grateful for that because he literally had the surgery
Yeah.
the next day. So it was pretty emergent. And I remember, so the UA line is like an umbilical IV, but in an artery that you can only place at birth in the umbilical, like in their belly button. And you usually don't want those
Mm-hmm.
in for more than 10 days because of the risk of infection. And I'm so glad that they hadn't taken it out yet and they were able to operate on there instead of going through the femoral artery. So it was just all crazy timing that it all worked out.
So you're arriving to New York. He's about to go through the surgery. Um, what is that like for you? Are you guys going to have somewhere to stay? Do you have to now figure out the logistics of like where you're staying while this is happening?
Yeah, it was pretty crazy. We were flown up with, he was in one of those little incubator looking things. Looks like a little, like a bobsled. And then we were brought up there, and then the ambulance brought us to the airport to New York, and then the ambulance picked us up and brought us in. And then actually, a friend of mine's friend up in New York wasn't staying at her apartment at the time. She was moving, and we were able to stay at her apartment for the 2 weeks we were up, or it was a little over a week we were up there. So it was really great. Yeah, and then surgery day was a very long day. It's about an 8-hour brain surgery, and you're nerve wracking. And we usually go across the street because it's right on Fifth. So we go to the park and we get like wrap food trucks, and we get one, and then we're right when we're ordering every single time, all 4 times they call us up, and it was crazy. And so then we ran up, we're trying to grab our sandwiches, or we just like throw money at them and like, don't worry about it. And we go up there, and
Yeah.
and then they told us that they were able to, close off so many feeders. They had to be more aggressive that first time to get him out of heart failure. I think they closed 2 big main feeder veins and like 2 little ones. And then the first 36 hours are pretty critical to make sure there aren't any, side effects, which could be a bleed, like hemorrhaging because it's such a thin vein when they're babies. It's more likely to hemorrhage, to have a bleed or stroke, seizures oftentimes. And he actually did overnight. His O2 stats kept going down into the 80s. And we told them, like, any changes, like, call us, let us know. That's like so scary when you have to leave because you have no control. And they're like, oh yeah, everything's fine. And I'm like, when the next morning I came in and he didn't seem as alert, and I was like, something's going on. And then we noticed his O2 levels were dipping down into the 80s, and they're like, oh yeah, I think it's just a faulty O2 monitor, because it's been doing that all night. And I'm like, been doing what? And then all of a sudden, I
Do
know,
that all night.
and I'm like, he seems a little bit out of it. It's not usual. And the frustrating thing is, sometimes you'll have nurses because they kind of work in 3-day shifts. And it was a new nurse who didn't really know him from the night before. So it's always scary when you have someone new because they're like, oh, I didn't know that wasn't his baseline, like his norm. And sure enough, a couple hours later, all of a sudden his stats were going into the 50s, and he turned blue and not responsive. And I remember the resident doctor, he came in and he was like, trying to like shake him a little bit, and like was flicking the bottom of his foot and was like, come on, buddy. And I like lost it and like ran and left the room and went and pumped and cried. It was terrible. It's like you feel terrible because you just run away, but like it's not like I can do anything. So I was just trying to stay out of the way, but it was a lot and super scary when you see your baby turn blue. But then they were able to give him medication and everything was fine. It was just kind of too much blood flow change for the brain, but they needed to be so aggressive to get him out of heart failure. So it's always like a little fine line of have you done enough, or do you need to go in and do another embolization? And so they were worried that it was maybe a stroke or a bleed, and they did an MRI. And I remember there was like one little area that maybe was ischemia, and in the report, and Dr. Berenstein like looked at it and he's like, no, it's fine. It's not. And it wasn't, and everything was fine. He was such a great man. We just love him. And it was just like a temporary thing. They did an EEG, and no more seizure activity because it's like on for 24 hours, like this little white cap with all the little leads coming out of it. Looks kind of crazy. And then we did a follow-up couple weeks later, and still no seizure activity. So it was just kind of.
You had to fly back to New York for the follow-up?
No, we just did that with our local neurologist, which is kind of monitor and watch for certain things, possible hydrocephalus or um, heart failure again, where like the rapid breathing. So I would just, like a crazy person, watch him breathe and count his breaths per minute.
Like
I
a
guess.
mom, not like a crazy person, like a
I
mom.
guess, but it was interesting. And then you're always playing baby or symptom. Oh, he's spitting up a lot. Is it hydrocephalus? Because, then the pressure and you're vomiting.
Hmm.
Or is it just a baby and he's spitting up? So I definitely called our local neurosurgeon often. And I remember Amy was like the head office manager lady, and she always got us in and like for a CT or for an ultrasound of the head just to check to make sure everything's okay. Because I was like, it might be something, but it never was. And we had so you go back every 6 months or so, 4 to 6 months for the next embolization. And in between the first two, they do every 2 months, they do a CT, which is really quick. But there is
Hmm.
radiation involved, which isn't ideal, but you don't have to be sedated or anything. And it's really quick. And they just check to make sure there isn't any hydrocephalus or else calcification. It's something that can happen in the brain. It looks like little white spots. And then we went back
Okay.
in September, just a routine. You kind of go on a Monday, have pre-op appointments Tuesday, surgery usually Wednesday or Thursday, two nights stay in the hospital if there are no complications, and then you can fly home. And that was the case. It was very routine. Everything went well. He said he closed up a really big feeder, and he told me, which he never gives stats because he's like, I don't want to say you'll probably need 2 or 3 surgeries because then if it's more, you're going to be mad at me. So he never gives numbers, but he
Hmm.
said there's a 50-50 chance it'll close on its own and collapse, that the malformation will collapse because we got a really big feeder. So, of course, I clung on to that. And sure enough, we went back 6 months later and it had collapsed and it was 90% or 95% closed. So they only had to do the angiogram, which is like a very detailed MRI. And that's how they do the
Hmm.
surgery. Then we got home and then a whole nother whirlwind of stuff happened, but I can go into that if you need me to. um,
I mean, if it's
yeah.
related to the
Well, yeah.
topic,
So
then, absolutely, as much as
they
you
were hoping
can.
that the malformation would close on its own that last little bit. And sure enough, on the
Okay.
flight home, maybe because of the pressure changes or just maybe by itself, the malformation clotted off on its own. But the problem is there's a pathway between your third and fourth ventricle that like holds the brain fluid, was blocked because the malformation kind of pushed on it. And that caused hydrocephalus.
Hmm.
And so he was very lethargic and tired, and his soft spot was bulging a little bit. So we took him in, and then he started vomiting, and it was definitely hydrocephalus. And they did a exterior ventricular drain, and EVD is where they like put a little hole and like almost like a little tiny straw and let it drip out the brain fluid.
So this is now you've come back to your
Yep.
hometown after the second surgery, and they're doing this now at your
Yeah,
local
this was actually after
hospital.
our third trip where they didn't need to do the surgery.
Okay.
Yes, and they had, just that they
Got
saw
it.
that it was 95% closed, and we should just probably be good to go. And it did close on its own, which is good, but it came with these other
Yeah.
complications, and so they thought the hydrocephalus resolved itself. They sent us home a couple of days later, but it apparently hadn't because a few days later, I just kept noticing he was like sweating. I'm like, God, you're really sweaty, but it was
Mm-hmm.
actually the brain fluid
Mm-hmm.
leaking out because I had like washed it. Well, I was like letting it heal. I didn't really want to bother it because it's like a scab directly to your brain. And so I kind of washed his hair well one
Mm-hmm.
night and got all that stuff off. The next day, I woke up and he had like wetness all around his head, kind of like he peed through, but not the bottom half, but the top half. I'm like, that's weird. So I was
Mm-hmm.
giving him his bottle and I'm like, Jim, will you look at his head? And sure enough, it was literally leaking spinal fluid out of his head. And we went to the emergency room and they stapled it shut and kept us overnight to see if it was just leaking or if it still had unresolved hydrocephalus. And it ended up, then he ended up getting bacterial meningitis because of that opened wound for so long. But we did first go home, but then it started leaking again. And we went in, and that's when he spiked a fever, and it was bacterial meningitis. It was a crazy 5 weeks in the hospital dealing with that.
So it was like you go to New York and they're like, everything
Yes,
is great. It's healing itself. And then you come home and it's like, wait a
yes.
minute. All these
And it
other
was like
things.
the
Get
scariest.
ready.
Finally, let your guard down and you like take a breath, like, oh my gosh, this is going to be over. And then shit hits the fan. Sorry, excuse me. And then poop hits
No,
the
no,
fan.
please. Cursing is okay on my podcast. Not a big deal. Listen, the stuff we're talking about, I think it calls for some curses
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
So,
So yeah, that was
um,
was a lot.
and after that, you didn't need to go back to New
We
York
went one more
anymore?
time, just to verify that it was closed, 6 months later. So it's like every 6 months we went. And it was closed and
Okay.
everything was great. He actually ended up, after his hydrocephalus thing, he needed they wanted to give him a shunt for his hydrocephalus, but I had to convince them, the head of neuro, that he needed a ETV, which is a different type of hydrocephalus intervention treatment, I guess, that is less invasive and where they just poke a little hole in the bottom of the third ventricle and allow the fluid to drain naturally instead of pumping it out with that shunt that pumps it into your tummy. And then that needs revisions through your whole life. And so, yeah, and then got the cure. He was almost 19 months old, and it was very exciting. You still kind of don't want to let your guard down because something crazy can happen.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, now he's 5.5 and doing really well. And after he was cured, and like maybe 6 months later, I think, or a year later, is when we started the nonprofit because we were noticing so many families, were joining this support group on Facebook, and they're like, what do we do? And we're trying to tell them it's like for the best outcomes, you need to travel to Dr. Berenstein or Dr. Orbach. And they weren't listening to these, crazy moms on the internet. And I was like, we need something backing us up, like a nonprofit with a medical advisory board and
Mm-hmm.
some more oomph behind us, and not just these random people who don't know what they're talking about, even though we're like know the most about it. um, like all of
Yeah.
the
Were people talking about Dr. Berenstein in that
yes,
group
yes,
before you
yes,
became a
yes,
part of
yes.
it? Okay, so he is the
Yes,
guy.
and
Okay,
Dr. Orbach, yeah,
got
actually,
it.
Dr. Berenstein, he invented he like pioneered the process of embolizing with glue. He actually started with crazy glue, actual crazy glue, like from the grocery store before they made medical grade glue. Um, and so
It's
they
crazy.
use the glue to glue off the veins that feed into the malformation to shut it off, because it's supposed to shut off itself, like when you're born or something, or at the end of pregnancy or something, but it just never does. So it's supposed to be closed. Like normal adults don't have it.
How common is this
One in
condition?
58,000 is what they're thinking. They told us 1 in 3 million, but that would be one child born in the U.S. with it. That Archer would have been the only one. But yeah, they're thinking 1 in 58,000. We think it might be more prevalent. They're just it's more and more being diagnosed and learning more and more
Mm-hmm.
information about it. So some say like 1 in 25,000. So it's really not as rare as they think. But
It sounds like it's not genetic. Is it kind of random? They don't
like
really
a
know.
combination. They have been doing some studies. There was a Yale study done by Dr. Chris Call. He believes it's partially genetic, partially environmental. They're not so sure. There are a few markers that
Mm-hmm.
can cause these AVMs. Some children have these genetic mutations and have VOGM, but some kids without those genetic mutations also have VOGM. So it's like kind of random. It's partially genetic, partially kind of random environmental. They're still working on that. There's a Dr. Andy Hale at University of Alabama who's also doing a study on it right now. So hopefully we'll get more answers from that. We're trying to help them get people to sign up for the study, since we have 1,400 people in our support group. So we have like over five or
Mm-hmm.
600 VOGM children that are in there. Hopefully we'll get some more answers. But there is a mother in Brazil who lost her firstborn son to VOGM, and she is now pregnant with another VOGM baby. She had a normal child
Wow.
between that, her daughter, and now so she's pregnant again. And Dr. Orbach is actually he's been doing in utero trials and embolizing in utero, and he just went down to Brazil to perform another one. So it's pretty amazing. We our nonprofit helped with the some of the costs associated with it. They were able to get some friends and family to donate, but they still had to take out loans. And, can you imagine having to have like
Yeah.
$60,000 in loans just to pay for your child's treatment? So, because it wasn't able to be covered by insurance there in Brazil because it's a trial. We help families all over the world go to either Germany or India or Egypt, and the surgery runs from 5,000 to $10,000 instead of 100,000. Isn't that insane? So we're
Unbelievable.
actually able to fully fund them.
It's insane.
So it's really great to be able to save a baby by, with $10,000 with flights and visas and passports and the surgery and housing, and it's crazy.
That's something I've always found to be crazy is that just standard birth of a child in a hospital was like 30 grand.
Crazy.
And it's and crazy to me because this is how we keep population going. And the fact that it costs like $30,000 to go to the hospital just to go through the process of delivering your child is,
It is
yeah,
crazy.
that's a topic of
For
its own.
sure.
Amazing for our Archer being cured. That's so wonderful. I'm so incredibly happy for you guys. I can't even fathom, what you went through. My daughter, she's 2.5. She's my first. And, just to think of the amount of fear and anxiety you deal with just being pregnant the first time, having a child the first time, and then you get hit with a whirlwind of, these health complications. So you guys went through a lot. And for you to go through all of that and then turn that into, this way that you now channel that energy of helping other people. So you met Lena through the Facebook
Yes,
group, right?
correct. Yeah, we were connected through there, and then we met in person. We've become like fast friends. We're best friends now. Even though we both moved, she moved to South Carolina, and 2.5 years ago we moved to Maine. So we are now far apart, but we still try to see each other and talk, several times a week. So we saw the need of. There was this one particular month. It was like May 2019, where there were like three or so new families that were either pregnant or just had a baby, and they needed intervention, and we were trying to talk to them and explain to them the importance of going to a specialist. And either it was like finances, they're like, oh, we just can't afford to do this right now, like to just pick up and go and fly, and we have other kids, and there's so many logistics. Like a lot of people are like, oh, I'm so sorry that like your first experience with your firstborn, and he had this condition. I'm like, almost better because I didn't have to worry about another child at home and try to figure out that logistics of who's going to care for him or her. So yeah, so then I noticed, so there are three babies that all passed that month, and one of them was in Philadelphia, and we actually had like convinced her to go to New York and like drive there because it's only like an hour and 15 minutes door to door. And it was like a Friday, and she was planning on going, like packing, going that weekend. And then Monday, I saw a post on Facebook that she had the baby. She's like, "Oh, he came early." They had to like in her hometown because she was originally going to go to Philly to deliver because that was like the biggest, like the children's hospital. And she didn't even go there. She delivered at home, and then they took the baby by ambulance to Philadelphia to Children's to CHOP. And I was like, why didn't they just go an extra hour and take her to the specialist? They ended up treating locally and had, didn't do too well, and embolized twice. They did two embolizations because they couldn't get him out of heart failure. And then he had strokes and bleeds and ended up passing. And it was just really hard because I got so connected with her, for weeks. I was talking to her and trying to help her through this, and it was just really, gut wrenching that the baby didn't make it, and they didn't make it to doctor.
why did this person not take
I
you as
mean, she did. She
seriously?
was planning on
But
going. She said she was. But a lot of
okay,
times, I mean,
okay,
a lot of times it's scary to do, like to just go
yeah,
across the country for a treatment. It's like you're not by your
hmm,
support network. If you're at least delivering locally, you've got other people helping. In finance,
hmm,
so the finances are a big thing. So we try to help with that, like with a travel expenses. We kind of give a travel grant or and also the logistics of just like you're so overwhelmed. You're like, what do I do? So I try to give them like step by step, like you need to get your fetal MRI or your please send it here to these emails, call these people. And then it's like we can get you the housing. Here are these. I give them all the resources for free flights and whatnot, and then like logistics of like how to maybe go about finding help for their older children if they have it. And we try to help logistically because that is overwhelming. And then financially, I mean, I'm like, come bring your kids to my house. I'm just kidding. But at that point, I'm just like,
yeah,
whatever it
but
takes. I
almost.
know. I'm almost,
Yeah.
because I just want to try to save as many as we can. So, and then like, but I'm like, if a international person can go from Venezuela to Germany by herself with her baby, or from Uganda to where did they go to? We had 5 babies from Uganda go to Egypt. We've had one from Ghana go to India. I'm like, if we can get them internationally, we can figure this out here in America where you speak the same language. You've been on flights. Like, you don't have to get visas and passports. Like, I know it's scary, but you got to, move mountains to save your babies.
So when did the nonprofit foundation officially launch?
Well, it technically started December 2019, but we didn't get like the letter from
Okay.
the IRS. And we launched February 28th, 2020, which is Rare Disease Day. Then COVID hit and it was crazy. But we still did rather well, like, getting donations and whatnot, even though it was like a very crazy time to start. Yeah, so it's been almost 4 years, and we're haven't really said no to anyone, because that's like my biggest fear is us not having enough funds, especially for our bigger
Mm-hmm.
international families. Because the U.S. it's you've got your insurance, we can help with some flights, and we've got Ronald McDonald House and different kind of organizations. Yeah, we just try to help as many children as we can.
Where are you getting most of your funding
Usually
now?
just individual donors, and like we do a walkathon every October because it's AVM Awareness Month, and I do a Santa photo shoot for a
Mm-hmm.
fundraiser. We do, a lot of families who have started a GoFundMe, either if they have any money left over, or unfortunately if their baby passed, they will donate that amount, which is amazing that something good can come of that terrible situation, that we're able to help others. It's just sad that to have to get those, but at least they are able to help others. And some there's one family that does like a yearly golf tournament in honor of their baby that passed. A few other ones have like their company that donates yearly or do like a matching program. So we have a lot of those things. So yeah, but most of them are people we know, or a few corporate sponsorships as well. We got our first grant from Bolt, which was amazing. They're medical supplies for like stroke and aneurysm treatment. So it's pretty cool. We're really excited. Our amazing intern, Elo, she is actually a UMaine student here at the University of Maine. She won us our first grant.
That's so
Mm-hmm.
special. That's really cool. So how big is your
It's just
team?
Lena and I, and then we have this intern, and then we have a few. Like one of the moms is helping with the gala in New York because she's local in New Jersey, technically. So we just have a few, and then we have a lot of moms that just are always there that help, kind of our ambassador program, where we have someone, either in a certain state or who delivered in Boston or delivered in New York City, and then kind of, and recently, like in the last 6 months, so that they can kind of help guide them
so we can get them as prepared as possible and having a support network. Or, unfortunately, we have lots that have passed, and so we kind of connect those moms so they have something, someone else that has been through it, because it's a terrible thing to go through, and then to even lose your child is, a whole nother level. We have started
Yeah.
a monthly Zoom support group as well with one of the moms. She is a therapist, and so she has kind of taken that under her belt to be like to plan them different topics every month. We did one on child loss, we did one on PTSD for NICU. Even just years of this, can cause lots of PTSD. And then, yeah, we want to do like one for dads because it's kind of different. Usually it's a lot of moms that are here and they need a different kind of support because they
Mhm.
try to be strong, and I feel like they need support. My husband is going to get on that one and help with that, so that'll be good. Yeah.
So I'm actually really glad that you touched on that, because one of the things that I've been very curious about is, I'm speaking to different people about, mainly women, about these challenging situations they went through, whether it was a child was born with a condition or like a pregnancy challenge or a miscarriage. All the attention is focused almost entirely on the woman in these situations. And the man just kind of has to be strong, but the men's feelings just fall into the background. And it's important to tend to the men as well, because they are just as much
Mhm.
a part of it as the women are. And, as a matter of fact, I'd love to have a male perspective on my podcast for some of these topics. So I appreciate that you're doing an intentional group session for men. Did your husband suggest that, or you guys just kind of were like, hey, we should do something for the guys
Not
too?
quite sure. I mean, I don't think he suggested it as a group Zoom support group, but he did, we had talked about how it's different for men, and I've definitely talked to some of the dads, and they kind of break down to me and they're crying and upset, and it's okay, because he's like, be so strong for my wife and for them. And I'm like, that's good, that you're kind of doing that, but you do need to take care of yourself, and it's okay to feel that way. I mean, I'm no
Mm-hmm.
therapist, so I'm like, oh, sorry, like, but I understand where you're coming from, and I was tell them, I'm like, I feel like you need to talk to other dads, and you guys need to be supportive towards each other, and because yes, I mean it is kind of sad that they go to the back burner because they are try to stay strong and keep face that you think they're fine, but they're not. Then overall, I guess
Mm-hmm.
for men not talking about it for so long, and it's so important. That's another thing I've learned, that apparently it's important to talk about these things to avoid PTSD, or such a terrible PTSD.
Makes sense. Let it out so you could hear yourself talking about it, have other people hear you talking about it. Yeah, I'm very much a supporter of that. You have this organization now, you're helping people all over the world. I'm sure that feels incredibly rewarding in combination with watching your own son thriving now. How can I make this interview as useful for you as it will be for my listeners?
Spreading awareness about VOGM is helpful, and just so people know that there is a nonprofit that helps others in case they, somebody knows someone who has VOGM, that we can be here to be supportive for them, and our Facebook group as well. It's like a private just for parents or families. And I mean, obviously, if anyone knows anyone who might have a grant or a need of a end of year giving, get some tax write offs. We're always very happy to receive those. And we don't just help families with VOGM, it's any kind of cranial AVM or AVF. So we've helped a few others. That it's like a pretty much similar thing and just a rare brain condition. So we help those as well. If anyone knows anyone with anything like that, or if they just want to reach out and I can try to connect them with the right type of doctor that they need. I try to help with that. I mean, we just try to advocate for all these little kiddos because they can't do it for themselves, and we try to help parents on how to advocate for their own children. Because another thing, you think a doctor is a doctor, but it's not the case. have noticed just in general, a lot of doctors only want to kind of refer in network or to their
Mm-hmm.
people that they know. And it is insane. Like you could literally just do an easy Google search and find Dr. Berens, or not Dr. Berenstein, but Dr. Orbach. They do a lot of advertising because it's like Boston Children's and Harvard. And I'm like, how do these doctors not find at least Dr. Orbach? It's not that hard. Um, and a lot of times parents just do a Google and find it, you know. But it is frustrating because in a lot of them, I've noticed even are kind of their own ego. They don't want to. They want to give it a whirl, give it the old college try and get a little notch on their belt that they can try this surgery. But I'm like, don't have this baby be your guinea pig. Like, you don't want just anyone operating on your brain because you can't get another one. So we want to make sure it's the best.
So it sounds to me like one of the takeaways here is listen to the doctors to an extent, do your own research, advocate for your child, go above and beyond.
Mm-hmm.
You know, funny enough, people make fun of how the idea of diagnosing from the internet, but clearly there are cases where if not for the internet, you know, who knows what would have happened.
They always say don't Google because you'll be too scared. And in this case, there's enough information now that you should Google. And you should, like, biggest thing is always get a second opinion and a third opinion and try to find the top specialist, no matter what it is. Like, my dentist wanted to give me a root canal, and I, like, literally snapped a picture of my x-ray in the dentist's office, sent it to my old dentist, like, I went to my entire life. And he's like, no, there's enough tooth left, you know, come on in and I'll just do a filling. That, you know, I'm like, it doesn't matter what it is, but if it's your brain, definitely think about a second opinion.
Yeah, or maybe a third even too, right? It's your brain, so very valuable information. Marlene, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy life to share your story with me and with my audience. It's so cool how you've chose to channel your own very difficult, very scary experience to now advocating for people and helping them figure out ways to resolve this and keep their children alive.
Yeah. Well, just thanks, Lex, for having me on and Lena on last week and for letting us talk about VOGM and our journey and our nonprofits. Really appreciate it. Any kind of word we can get out there is really important to continue to be able to help these babies. Just thank you so much.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode or have suggestions for other topics, please leave me a comment, send a message on social media, or email me. I would love to hear from you.